Hi, Azim. Thank you so much for coming to talk to me and the class who are virtual right now because of current circumstances. And actually, a lot of my classes are online, so this will go up to them. Um, Obviously, we both know you're a social psychologist in UBC, and you are also the religion and morality guy in the sense that you have done so much experimental research on the relationship between, uh, decision making, pro sociality decision making, and morality and religion, and the role of religious belief in that. And so it's really great to hear your perspective because the students read one of your articles. It was a really straightforward title, like "Why does religion make us moral?" I forget what
Mhm.
is that right? Did I get it right?
Yeah.
And I'm first of all, I'm really envious of you because I just think it's incredible that you get, to have this research topic that's so applicable and is so engaging, and everyone wants to talk about morality. And so I have a few questions that I'd love your opinion on. The first
Sure.
one, very broad question that you might hate me for, but I mean, what do you think makes us moral or make certain decisions?
Well, I think I may have gone into this in that paper that you're referring to, but there is a there is a common evolutionary core which motivates us to act in ways which are going to be in our long-term best interest. Since in our as social beings, acting in pro-social ways, ways that cooperate with certain people, ways that make sure we pay our debts, those those have those have led to selection pressures for us to have a set of moral emotions which make us feel like, well, things like gratitude, things like guilt and shame, which actually motivate us to engage in adaptive manners. Now, beyond that, there's a whole another level of complexity when culture imposes additional moral rules.
Right.
Um, and that's where I think religion comes in. First, it can motivate us to engage in those kind of core pro-social aspects when we would otherwise feel like we could get away with not doing it, and when we could otherwise feel like we could be selfish. And then on top of that, it adds a set of divinely inspired uh, cultural rules to follow, which benefits the cultures that have emerged, right? So things like, well, you should be monogamous. That's not an evolved thing. That's a cultural thing, and it's enforced through religious rules.
It's kind of difficult to, you're talking about the role of evolution, which plays a part really strongly, cultural evolution in your ideas and in your research. And so it's kind of interesting because it seems to me that it can be difficult to tease apart what is an evolutionary pressure and what is a cultural prescription, like the idea that you must be monogamous. I mean, that idea from an evolutionary perspective seems like it could also enhance our survival rate, right? Or am I talking nonsense?
No, no, not at all. It becomes a bit of a detective story because you want to figure out what the natural state of our species is. One way you can look at that is to see, well, across all cultures that we have data for across time, how many of them end up monogamous, how many end up not monogamous. What
Right,
you tend to find is like, well, a very small minority end up monogamous. If you
right.
look at our cousin species, they're not very monogamous. And so you can extrapolate from that that at most times our cousin species like the chimpanzees, the bonobos, and the gorillas, they're not monogamous. And at most times in our history, we haven't been monogamous. So it's unlikely that monogamy is an evolved state um, uh, of humankind. However, you can look at the cultural history of the idea of monogamy and see when it came, what it accomplishes society-wide, which is that it tamps down intrasexual competition between men, which is a terribly destabilizing thing.
Right.
And so long as you have monogamy doing that, you'll have a more stable, peaceful society. So it's like, it makes sense that that's a cultural thing that we would develop. And it seems clear that that's not a natural thing for us to do.
So sometimes these cultural prescriptions hinge on the back of what evolutionary predispositions are, and sometimes they go against it, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
You're a detective in the sense that you're trying to peel back all the layers of this onion of morality to see, you know, what's the level of culture, and you see religious beliefs as part of that cultural layer, and then the evolutionary stuff is another layer, right? So how do you go about exploring these questions experimentally? Like what methods do you use, and can you give us an example of some work you've done so that it becomes more than just a paper that students are reading?
Sure. So um, there's this interesting intersection between experimental economics and evolutionary biology in terms of trying to understand what are some sort of core moral principles that people follow, and then figure out how to measure those. And over the 80s and 90s, those kind of converged on a set of economic games that would try to, in a very controlled laboratory conditions, distill exactly some sort of moral principle that people would follow. So one very commonly used game is called the dictator game, which has two people who are usually kept anonymous from each other so as to make sure there's no weird reputational thing going on between them. They're kept anonymous from each other. One of them is randomly given some sum of money, say $10, and they're asked, okay, well, the other participant, who is just like you, except randomly assigned not to receive any money, they're in the other room. Here's $10. You can keep all of it yourself. You can split it in any way you want with the other participant. They'll never meet you. What do you want to do? And this ends up being a good measure of generosity. It distills, again, it tries to remove all the other variables and just see how generous is this person going to be in an anonymous situation.
Right.
And what most people do in that situation, and this is what the experimental economics literature has shown, is, well, most people keep all the money for themselves because why not, right?
Right.
And so one of the studies that I did early on was, well, what if you activate belief or thinking about God in this moment? If people are in a situation where they're reminded of maybe some moral commitments, or they feel like maybe they're not as anonymous as they would otherwise think, is that going to change how generous they are in this very specific laboratory controlled game?
Right.
And that's what it turned out in that early study we found, and has been replicated many different ways ever since, using different ways of reminding people about God. We use this kind of, I guess you could say it's an embattled technique right now of sort of implicitly priming, trying to secretly arouse the idea of God in them.
Right.
Other people have used much more overt techniques, and we've used more overt techniques since then. One of my favorite ones was the azan, the Muslim call to prayer. They used so they did this study in Morocco, and they had these shopkeepers, and they played a version of the dictator game with them, except the money would go to charity. And they played the game either when the call to prayer was audible, when it was going off, or when it wasn't. Okay. And this is work by Eric Duhaime. And what they found is that when the call to prayer was going on, which happens 5 times a day in Muslim countries, everybody gave all the money to charity. It was an extremely strong effect. And it demonstrates in the real world what some of these religious primes activate in people, how they inspire people to engage pro-socially. So
at least temporarily.
Yes.
It seems that, you know, the studies that you conducted, as you said, have been replicated. So it's a robust finding that when people are consciously or unconsciously thinking about some aspect of religion, a deity, or maybe even a value it evokes, I guess, I'm sorry, just now I'm thinking about what I'm thinking about, and I guess that you would argue that it's actually the idea that a deity could be watching you, right? So there's a kind of monitoring effect.
Yeah, that's what we speculate is going on. One thing you find is that this effect only works for people who are believers themselves. So if you activate the idea of God for an atheist, even if they have these associations, let's see, God, Christianity, charity, these are all like associations, it doesn't actually motivate them to be more pro-social. So it seems like you need what you would call a disposition by situation interaction. You need both the dispositional belief to be there, and then you need the situation to activate it, to push it up.
Okay. And what about someone else's God? So would that activate the other person's? Have you guys tested that yet, or what do you think?
Yeah. So what we found, so one recent study we did, this was work that was led by Sindel White. We primed God or karma to see if they had similar effects, and they do have similar effects for people who believe in those respective things.
Okay.
But the God effect doesn't work for the karma believing people who don't believe in God, and the karma doesn't really work for the, it works a little better than the other way, but not really nearly as well. So it's like, again, you have to believe in karma. If you believe in karma, not God, the karma thing is what's going to activate your pro-social behavior, not the God thing.
So this makes me wonder about, so is the generosity specific to your in-group? If I'm a Christian and I hear, or let's stick with the example you give. If I'm a Muslim and I hear a call to prayer, am I generous towards Muslims as opposed to another religious groups or an atheist cause?
So that's a super important question. I've wanted to answer that question for over 10 years now. We have a bunch of data now. We're just writing it up. And so what we did in this context, it was like what we do before. We use these more overt primes. Actually, we just tell people, think about God. And it makes them think about God, which is good.
Right.
So every time we've done that, pre-registered studies, it does increase generosity to a member of the in-group. The question is, does it also increase generosity to a member of an out-group? And does it depend on what the out-group is? And so we did this study with Christians in the US, evangelical Christians, so more fundamentalist Christians in the US, with the out-group recipient being either a Muslim or an atheist.
Okay.
We also did this in Palestine and Israel with Jewish Israelis and Palestinian Muslims. We did this in Fiji with Hindus, Christians, and Muslims there.
Wow.
Across everywhere, what we found was that it equally increases the generosity to the in-group and the out-group, which actually surprised me because I thought it would have a parochial effect like you suggest, which is that it'll increase giving to the in-group, but not to the out-group, especially not to atheists, right?
And out-groups that are, in Palestine, like these are not, these are hard-won loyalties and real in-group out where inter-group warfare is really it's really rife, right? So I would have expected with the if you'd said the atheists and the I said okay, well, I kind of get they're loyal to them both, but I'm just thinking now about if that's like going in the 1980s to Northern Ireland and seeing whether Catholics or Protestants they're more generous. So I do find that surprising, and I'm glad that we got the scoop. That the class got the scoop of this new research. So this is related to, so every year students take this class and they report back. And it's interesting because one of the pieces of information that they often question or they're not quite sure about is this finding that believers are more generous, but to their in-group. And they say, isn't it the case that they're more generous at a baseline and they're even more generous to their in-group? Or does it mean that they're not more generous, but on the baseline, but more generous to their in-group? Could you clarify that, maybe?
So there's a bunch of things going on here. It's actually more complicated than even the way you spelt it out.
Okay.
We're currently with one of my grad students working on a big meta-analysis of, it's got to be well over 100 studies spanning 40 years looking at this question about whether religious people are more pro-social and less antisocial than non-religious people.
Yeah.
What we tend to find, irrespective of the target, in-group versus out-group target, is if there, if the way you're measuring prosociality is
Mm.
through self-report,
Yeah.
where people say, oh yeah, I give, $100 a week to charity, or what would you do in this situation? Would you volunteer for this? If you measure it through self-report, you find a pretty substantial difference where religious people report being more pro-social than non-religious people. If you measure it behaviorally, right? So this is what those experimental economists were trying to do. They're trying to say, let's actually measure the behavior. That way we're not going to be influenced by just social desirability, right? You want to appear like you're a good person. It's easy to say you're a good person. What do you actually do when there's real money at stake?
Mm.
Now the effect is much, much smaller. There actually is a small effect, but we only saw it after you kind of collapse literally over 100 studies together. So it's a much more circumscribed effect for religious people having behavioral evidence. Now, the behavioral evidence also has its problems. It's not perfect. It's not a perfect reflection of what's actually going on in the world itself.
Right.
So it's a complicated picture. In terms of the in-group, out-group thing, what I've seen based on the self-report literature is that religious people give more both to in-group and to out-group charities.
Okay.
One of the reasons for that is that they're part of structured organizations, and structured organizations is a good way of getting people to give to things.
Right. So it seems, let me see if I understand this. So the difference behaviorally, when you measure behaviorally across many different studies and draw a general conclusion, it seems that religious people do give more, but it's not significantly more, right?
Statistically, it's significantly more.
Okay.
Colloquially, it's not significantly more.
Okay. So, all right. So it's a statistically significant amount. So they do give more. So we can say, all right, they give more, but it's not so much that, we're going to be falling off our seats when we read the findings.
It's not the degree it's not the level that you would get if you just read the self-report literature.
Okay. It's much smaller.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons for that is because they're part and parcel of these institutions that kind of, and part of the institution's values and part of, like Sunday collection, you go every Sunday and, which of course is now going to dramatically change because of social interaction rules. And that's kind of interesting for your research. Okay. So I guess my final question, wrapping up to you, is what current projects are you working on? Like, where do you see this research going in the next many years? What big questions are you going to answer next?
Well, so I think I've alluded to the two biggest questions that are still weighing on my mind in this area of research. As you know, I got a whole other area of research which I've been concentrating on a little more in recent years. But
your chair position?
Well, yeah, just the general moral psychology stuff. Also looking at sort of emerging technologies and social trends.
It's all like self-driving cars. I mean, you're a person of all different research interests.
It's all under the morality umbrella.
Like,
so that's how I justify it.
Program the voice of God into self-driving cars to make people more comfortable about driving them.
I should try to find some project which unifies all these desires, some sort of crazy kludgy study. Anyways, so the parochiality question is a big one, and I'm heartened by the data that we've collected. I don't think it's the last word on the issue. And the reason for that is because religions are complex. More of that, they're complexes of various things. One of which is God beliefs, and even if the God beliefs are motivating a universalist approach to morality, that doesn't mean that the entire effect of religion is universalist. It could still have parochial aspects. It could still have ways that inspire conflict. And so delineating what aspects of religion lead us to be more universalist, what aspects of religion lead us to be more parochial, I think that's a very important question. So that's one area. And then the second area is this, the limitations of self-report for delineating not just the relationship between religion and prosociality, but religion and really anything positive or negative. I have a big concern about the literature here because with a few exceptions, really the only way of getting getting a measure of people's religious belief is through self-report itself, right? So you have people who are reporting a level of religiosity, and you have people who are reporting a level of, say, pro-sociality or health or happiness. All of these things are socially desirable things.
Yeah.
Which means that if you find a correlation between these factors, say religion and happiness, what you might just be picking up on is there's certain people who are motivated to self-report more positive things. And so they're going to report being more religious than they actually are, and they're going to report being happier and healthier and more pro-social than they are, which means you're picking up on a spurious relationship there.
Right.
And figuring out how to figure out what the actual relationship is I think, critical. And it's a big, challenging issue, right? So this is where we get into the limitations of our methods, and we got to find creative ways of figuring it out.
And one of the ways that you alluded to is, looking at behavioral economics as opposed to kind of traditional social psychological self-report surveys. I love the Sunday effect study where they look at the number of pornographic downloads or something, or sites accessed, and on a Sunday it was dramatically less. And that was in America, right? Was it in America?
That was in America, yeah. So they did this in a couple. So one way was with charity, right? So one way they found is that if you send appeals to people who've given to charity to give more to charity, these appeals really work for religious people on Sundays, and then they sort of diminish as you get further from Sunday, and they go back up again the next Sunday. For non-religious people, it has no effect. For the porn thing, what they did, if I remember right, is they looked at, yes, I don't think it was downloads. I think it was signups for porn sites.
Oh, really?
How those differed based on counties, based on the religiosity of the county or the city or metropolitan area, something like that. And yeah, what they found is that on Sundays, porn consumption, but not consumption of other media, right? So not TV watching or anything else. So it's not just that they're like at church and so don't have time. Actually, porn consumption goes down on Sundays, and then there's like a bounce back effect on Mondays where it's like, okay, well, the prime only lasts so long, and now we can get back to our behavior before.
There was part of me thinking, yeah, but I mean, people got to go to church, they got to eat their Sunday dinner, their kids are around, and then I'm thinking, what on earth has become of my mind of, the things that we analyze as researchers. I really think the first project is so important also because, in this course, we're looking at these popular misconceptions of religion and morality, especially as propagated by the media, especially where religion is concerned. And I love how you, really kind of deconstructed that and saying which aspects of religiosity, impact which aspects of pro-social behavior in relation to groups. So it's really, that's a psychological mindset. And that's really how we're going to make progress on this issue. And you're definitely the guy to do it. So thank you so much.
Happy to do it,
for coming and talking to the class. And I'm excited to see your new paper when it comes out.
All right, I'll let you know.
Thanks, Azim.
Thank you, Claire.
Bye.